Welcome to the Powercat Podcast, the original K-State sports show. Here's your host, Tim Fitzgerald.
Welcome to another edition of the Powercat Podcast. I'm Fitz, and I'm joined today by Missy Heydrich, better known in my brain as Missy Decker Heydrich. You'll always be Decker to me.
Thank you. Thank you.
K-State basketball player, a very good one, and also a basketball analyst. What conferences did you work this year?
Let's see. Well, a lot of Big 12 games. Spent quite a bit of time in the Summit League, the Ohio Valley Conference, a few games for ESPN Plus, and I actually just got back over the weekend. I was in Cleveland, and I was lucky enough to call the MAC, the Mid-America Athletic Conference women's final in Cleveland for their tournament for CBS Sports Network. So just super pumped. Have been bouncing around all over the country and getting to see great women's basketball and men's basketball as well, because I had the pleasure to do both, especially in the Summit, and just great mid-major basketball when you get a chance to see it.
I'm just curious. Do you get pushback from men when you do men's basketball?
I really don't. It's actually very refreshing because if you do your homework and you understand and you know the right questions to ask, people are very responsive to that, and they appreciate it. I think they appreciate people that educate themselves, understand who their teams are, what they do. If you want to get into the weeds and X's and O's, a lot of those coaches will love to talk to you about it. So I find that to be fun. But no, I think hopefully we're past some of that pushback out there in the universe, and you really just want people that are able to help promote and talk about the game in the right way.
Yeah, my sense of it is when someone attacks a female analyst or announcer, it's not really about, that's the access point to be hateful, but it's really about the content.
Yes.
And then they blame the entire sex of, females are all, they shouldn't be doing this.
Right.
But there's so much more now on TV and so many more analysts out there. We do appreciate people that do their homework, are prepared. Don't just glance at the cliff notes and then call a game. They actually dig in. So speaking of digging in, let's dig into Kansas State women playing in the NCAA Tournament against Fairfield. They play 1:30 p.m. on Friday on ESPN News, which is interesting. Opener for K-State. Let's just start with your thoughts about where K-State is. They get Ayoka Lee back. We'll get into how much that means, but this team has struggled as of late without her. After beating TCU, they kind of went in the tank a little bit.
Yes, I think they most definitely rode the wave as they got into the final stretch of the Big 12 regular season and into the conference tournament. Played themselves ultimately out of that first four, didn't get the double bye, didn't have a chance to win a regular season title when they were picked number one. And obviously, when you don't have an All-American in the middle, that makes a big difference. That's a huge gap that you have to fill. I think there were spurts for this team and games in which they played really well without her and others that they didn't. And sometimes that is, I think, is a result of, you kind of look at it two ways. As you look at the NCAA tournament field, but I'm looking at teams all over the country who lost really good players during the year to injury. And they figured out a way to overcome that. It maybe took them a game or two or a couple of weeks, but they found their footing and they did it. I'll give you an example. Nebraska. They were a great example of that. The Big 10 freshman of the year a season ago, now a sophomore, Natalie Potts, she goes down with an ACL end of November, early December. Took them a couple weeks to be without really one of their best players, but they found their footing and they were able to make themselves relevant in the Big 10 throughout the course of the season. I think K-State's experience is different in the sense that you were always with this notion she's coming back. When does she come back? There was the 7 to 8 games she missed. Then she played for a little bit against Arizona State, goes down. Then she's gone again for a bunch of time. That changes preparation, changes practice. It changes how they're going about scout. All of that is different because you're just dealing with that sort of idea that she's going to return. So I think that you ride that wave. It was unfortunate. I think that they couldn't get that double bye, that they didn't put themselves in that top 4 in the Big 12 tournament. And obviously, I think disappointment in the sense that you don't win a conference regular season crown of which you were picked. And their slide at the end of the year is a result of where they are, that they don't get to host, and that they're in as a 5 seed.
Okay. So Ayoka is coming back. She says she's close to 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Count me as a little bit skeptical.
Mm-hmm.
But she hasn't been, what's the word I want to say, as athletic or as mobile, I think, this year as even last year before her injury. I think she's been impacted, unfortunately, by bad feet. It's hard to solve them. They're going to be bad. But what will it mean if Ayoka comes back close, somewhat good, or really good?
Well, I think if she's somewhat close, let's say we're in the 75%, then you have to start talking about amount of minutes and how much time she's going to spend on the floor. That's going to be the biggest factor. Prior to the injury issues during conference play, I mean, I think I went back and looked, there weren't too many games where she was over 25 minutes regardless. They were in a load management mode from the get-go this year. That was understandable.
Yep.
So it's going to be about how many minutes she can log, the type of team that you play in terms of their system. And if I was looking at a scout, I'd be saying, well, we got to get up and go. We've got to make her work. You got to make her run. And so now if she gets close to 100%, is feeling that way, that hopefully then she can play more, that she can push that number of minutes she's on the floor. The thing about fatigue that will impact, and I think especially big post players, we see it on both men's and women's, is that then you put yourself out of position. I'm late defensively, maybe in a rotation. I think I could go over your back and get a tip, but I'm going to get called for an over the back charge trying to get an offensive board. It's just sometimes because you're worn down. Yep. So I think that sharpness is what you've got to keep your eye on, especially in the early stages of that first round game. And if K-State can advance, what the turnaround is going to be like and how she can manage that physically.
Is 10-minute Yoki good enough to help this team win games?
If you could get off to a strong start, I mean, I think if you could just put the pedal to the metal and, get somebody blown out of the water 16-2 right out of the gate, and that, you get a fast start. But it's the NCAA tournament. And so the fact there's not going to be a ton of blowouts. We're going to see some in the 116s, maybe some 215s here or there. After that, there's a lot of good games, and teams are going to be prepared. They've got a week. And this is not back in the 90s when you had to call somebody and get a scout and get a tape. This is all out there in the free universe. Thank you, Huddle, and whatever else they use. I mean, they can get whatever they want. So everyone's going to understand. Everyone's going to be prepared. I think it's the coaches that come ready with new wrinkles and new ideas that can make a difference. So if they put the pedal to the metal, you get out to a big lead, that's a different story. But I think that she's going to have to log more minutes and be her effective self on both ends.
I would agree with all that. It's going to be interesting to see. Actually, I was pretty impressed with the three backups and how they kind of rotated through and did a good job. It just changes your personality so much. And then those three posts all changed the personality within a game because they all did different things. And I think it just became a little bit hard for the team to manage. Also, it's almost like they were worse off after the KU game when she came back. And then I feel like they felt the loss of her more after that than the actual first injury when she was out. They just never seemed to play to personality, but that personality of running and pressing really depended on opponents. Am I reading that wrong?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think you have to be able to understand who you are going up against. Take, for instance, the fact they played 2 games without her against West Virginia. And so in both games, put themselves in a position, especially in Kansas City at T-Mobile, they were ahead. But then what happens? Here comes the pressure. Here comes the chaos. How do you manage that? And once you get flustered and you get sped up and you get out of system and you get out of character, then things start to go downhill. You have to be able to manage those ebbs and flows in a game. I think for me, a little bit of a disappointment, especially in the 2 games they played against West Virginia, that there wasn't more composure, especially from veteran players to manage that. but sometimes the snowball goes and there's nothing you can do about it. I just think also when you think about the three, whether it's Maupin as well as, Taylor and Lester, who have come in and given them minutes in Ayoka Lee's absence, they're all different. Sometimes you can play faster. Sometimes you play slower. They're more back to the basket. Lester wants the 15-foot jumper. So we're just always looking a little bit different, especially offensively in system. And when you get late into the year, I'll be honest, you got to know who your identity is. And I felt like sometimes maybe they were just really struggling to figure out what that was. Yeah,
I would agree with that too. Let's get into Fairfield from the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, I believe. It's a pretty good team. They come in at 28-4, 19-1 in conference play. Look, it's not easy to be perfect, but come on, guys. Tell us what you know about Fairfield.
Well, Fairfield is been one of those really good feel-good stories in women's basketball the last couple of years. They have found themselves receiving votes in the AP Top 25. So there's a lot of people across the country taking notice. They're incredibly well coached in a very disciplined team. Number 10 in the nation right now in scoring defense. They allow just 54 points a game. So they're going to get after you. We mentioned at the very start a second ago about teams being able to adapt and deal with losing key players. They lost their best player this year to an ACL injury. She was their conference player of the year last year, a guard in Janelle Brown. She went down with an ACL out for the season. They still went 19-1 in league play, 28-4, back-to-back regular season titles, back-to-back tournament titles. Their head coach, Carly Thibodeau-Dudonis, I just think the world of her. I think she is going to be one of the hottest names and is one of the hottest names right now in coaching searches. She's turning down a lot of jobs, but she's a very, very good coach, and they will be well prepared come Friday.
It sounds like a team that will do to K-State what has really troubled them, and that's get run off the three-point line. And that's really about discipline. I mean, you can say that any team can do it, but teams just don't have the defensive discipline to stick with it every possession. It sounds like Fairfield will.
They do, and they're going to have quickness, and they're not going to be big. So, I mean, a lot of people, I've seen folks out there, they're like, well, their biggest player is 6'2". Yeah, their biggest player is 6'2". Their best player is a sophomore. Her name is Megan Anderson. She's 6'1". She's averaged close to 15 a game this year. One of the best freshmen in the nation a season ago. But at 6'1", now you're talking about kids that can get up and down the floor, and they're going to put their own pressure out you on the perimeter. They're long. They're going to contest. So, yes, if they run you off the three line, you've got to be in attack mode. That's where some of these K-State players have excelled this year, i.e. Serena Sundell. We've seen Ziana Walker put it on the floor and go. But they're all going to have to be ready to be able to handle that kind of pressure. I don't foresee this K-State team getting a lot of standalone threes against Fairfield. Those are going to be shots few and far between. You're going to have to figure out a way to manufacture some offense. Now, with Lee in the lineup, as you and I both know, Fitz, that changes things, right? Yeah. Because now she draws so much attention. You got to quickly rotate to shooters. So that's where you're going to get some looks. And if you're Fairfield, you're going to have to kind of pick your poison and take some chances. But I do think they are not going to let them just open freely get those three-point looks. It's going to be much more difficult to find points.
Yeah, it sure is a lot easier to get open the three-point line when you got a dominant post player that they have to sag down on. It does help quite a bit. But let's take this from the perspective of it's easy for me to be real honest as someone who doesn't watch every game to understand how the women play with Ayoka Lee. I mean, it's easy. It's a great brand of basketball. Without her, they become much different. And against a defensive team like this that has troubled Kansas State with, really, I don't want to say sound, smart defensive teams, maybe is the word. Who needs to step up for the Wildcats to get past this game? Because this isn't your normal opening round game. This team is dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, I always say, when I look at the women's bracket, probably compared to the men's, 8-9's awful. That's like women's basketball purgatory because you got to go play, you win, you play the number one seed on their home court. Like that just is awful. The 7-10's tough to pick. 5-12's usually not as much, but I think this 5-12 is one that is going to be very interesting to a lot of folks. I would say in order for this team to be able to have the success they need, they're going to need a really big day from Serena Sundell. She's got to come to play. And not that she hasn't all year, because she was a first team all conference player. And I thought she picked up the load. Think about me. She carried that team in their win against TCU at home. She's done it all year, but she's going to have to play at a much higher level consistently for 40 minutes, that she can't allow that chaos and quickness or pressure that you might feel. You missed a couple shots. Don't try to go make something happen right away. She's got to play within herself. So I think Sundell's got to have a big day. I think you've got to have quality minutes off your bench. So whomever that is, whether that's the post players, whether that's Terrence Dides, they have got to give you a lift. It cannot be empty minutes from the bench. I think that's going to be key. And at sides at 5'6", when you're talking about some bigger guards and bigger wings for Fairfield, well, that's a concern because she can get swallowed up, and we've seen that happen. She's got to be smart too. Don't force things and get yourself open, relocate, and find the ability to do that. So I would say bench has got to help. They got to give a lift, and you just need Serena Sundell to lead from the front. There's no doubt.
Yep, I would agree. She's a remarkable player, and it puts a lot of pressure on her, but she needs to be remarkable. She really does. We'll get into this more. We're going to do a VIP edition of this podcast that'll be behind our paywall, talking about the Missouri job. Jeff Mittie has now been publicly asked about it for the first time. So here in the free public podcast, let's talk about this. Now that it's out, and I'm sure the ladies on the team had been hearing this, there's no way they haven't. But now that it's out, our friend Kellis Robinette did ask Coach Mittie about it, and it now could be a distraction. Where do you stand on that? Because is this something that could kind of shake up this team a little bit?
I would hope that it doesn't, from the sense that this is an incredibly experienced group of young women. This is an older roster. If this was a roster of freshmen and sophomores primarily, I think you have a different take on that. And there's a lot of teams across the country who are dealing with that right now, with their coaches' names being in all of these conversations across big time searches. So that's hard. But I think that the experience and the leadership from some of these seniors is vitally important. I think you've got a calming presence and someone like Ayoka Lee, no matter what, that really owns that locker room and leads this group, both in voice and by example. So regardless of how it is played publicly, and the responses that you hear from Coach Mittie or others, I have confidence in the fact that this is a very tight-knit group of young women who are very much understanding, and maybe feeling a little bit slighted. Think about it. Like, they were ranked, you're finishing in the top 20 and you don't get to host, and you're watching Maryland and you're thinking, well, how come they get to? And I think when they saw Ole Miss go into the 5, everybody got excited. But listening to the conversations and the feedback from the selection committee, especially the chair, the reason why Maryland moved into that 4 slot was because of how they finished and because of their overall net and the teams that they beat that were 100 or more. So there's a method to the madness of how this plays out. Do they feel slighted? Do they have a chip on their shoulder? They very may well have that. And I think for them, that's got to be the motivator right now. You got to tune out the rest of the noise.
Yep, certainly. And we will discuss that in a moment for our VIP peeps. But let's look ahead. Let's say K-State does win. What do you know about Kentucky?
Well, this is a Kentucky squad. I think they were feeling kind of shaky as well, wondering whether or not they were going to have a chance to host. When you look at the bracket, that makes them the last 4 because they're in USC's bracket, who was the last one. So, you got to kind of think of it that way. But I think in terms of what Kentucky has, this is Kenny Brooks' first year. Incredibly successful coach, James Madison, built a juggernaut at Virginia Tech in the ACC, took the Kentucky job last year. He brought 2 key transfers with him. You're going to hear the name Georgia Amore a lot over the next few days in that 14 pod because she's really, really good. fifth-year senior guard, came with Kenny Brooks from Virginia Tech, and she's one of the best in the country, averaging close to 19 a game. The other player that came with him, who I think is very interesting, is the SEC Defensive Player of the Year this year, and she's a sophomore, and her name is Clara Strack. She's 6'5". She's a different type of post player than Ayoka Lee, and so that's going to be a challenge, no doubt. They've got size, they've got speed, they can score, and they've got Georgia Amore. I cannot emphasize that enough. She is really good. 22-7 on the year. They were 11-5 in the SEC. And when you think about how good the SEC is, for him to be 11-5 in his first year there, that's one heck of a coaching job by Kenny Brooks.
I know everyone wanted the home site, and of course, and K-State would have thrived in that environment. They would have loved it. But Missy, I almost feel like this team needed to be slighted. They needed a little chip on their shoulder. This won't be easy, but they are more than capable of getting out of there, particularly if Lee is fairly good to go. They're more than capable of getting out of there and probably running headlong into a USC.
No, I would absolutely agree with you. I think this sets up actually a really great scenario for them. I go back to the idea that this was a year of big expectations and big goals. When you are anointed as the preseason favorite of the year in your league and you're picked number one, well, it's a big target on your back, but also you feel kind of pretty good about yourself, right? And so you know that you have an opportunity to win every game that you are in and the challenges that you present and the teams you go up against. So I'm sure that this group does have a chip on their shoulder, and I think they should. And I think you should take that as a bit of a motivator. And, they're going to have a fantastic crowd. If you match up with Kentucky in the round of 32, put those other blue Wildcats, have those people sit on their hands. Don't give them anything to cheer about. It's going to be a hostile environment if you advance in that space, but I think they're ready for it. They've been there. Think about the environments that you play in the Big 12. There's a lot of really great women's basketball spaces around here, and I think they'll be ready for it. But sometimes you just got to kind of, what's that old adage from the Kevin Costner movie? You've got to clear the mechanism. I think if you clear the mechanism, yes, you'd love to be sleeping in your own bed and in your own locker room and be playing at Bramlage in front of 11,000 people. Sometimes you just got to clear it and you got to go take the challenge on head on. And that's what they're going to have to do in Lexington.
Very good. Missy Heidrich with your preview of K-State Fairfield. 1:30 p.m. Friday on ESPN News. So buckle up, K-State fans. Basketball season isn't over. It might be over for the men, but you got this. And this could be a lot of fun. We'll see how the Cats do against Fairfield. And after we close up shop here, we're going to move over to a VIP window and handle that for our subscribers as we talk about that Missouri job and where they're headed down the road. And how much does it piss off Missy to know that Missouri could be stealing coaches? Missouri. That's it for this edition of the Powercat Podcast. We appreciate you watching, and we'll be back with more this week from other topics and other analysts at GoPowercat.com.
This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite podcast platform.